Roberta Winters, president of the League of Women Voters of Radnor Township. And I know you, like many other people, are talking about the upcoming elections, particularly in this age of the coronavirus pandemic. Election dates have changed and vote by mail is being encouraged. No one wants to take the risk of voting in person at the polls. Now, there are a lot of questions around the election, and people need to have their questions answered. And unfortunately, a lot of myths need to be debunked. The League of Women Voters is here today to help you better understand the process of the election and to find out just what is allowable and what is not allowed under the law. That's why I've asked Jamie Mogil to return to be with me today. As you know, she is an attorney who has served on the state board of the League of Women Voters as their vice president. She also is a member of the Lower Merion and Narberth League. She ran the election protection efforts right here in the Commonwealth and serves as an election law attorney. She is my go-to person whenever I have a question about voting rights. Last time we discussed the changes in the voting process and how to use that one-stop voting site for all kinds of information. That's at VotesPA, PA that we jokingly call, or votespa.com. We hope you've all gone there to apply for that mail-in ballot. The deadline is May 26th. So, welcome back, Jamie.
Thanks, Roberta. It's always good. I love talking civics with you and being on the Mainline Network. I'm sure today will be no different. And it really is important as we are hearing a lot focused on elections as the coronavirus has upended our normal lives, including elections with the new election day here in Pennsylvania on June 2nd for the primary. So happy to be here talking with you.
Well, I'd like to really kind of start at the beginning. So just who does run the elections?
Yeah, this is a great way to start because I think this is right away, we need to debunk a myth. The president does not control elections. Our elections are administered by the states. So here in Pennsylvania, specifically the 67 counties administer the elections. So there might be slight different rules between maybe Montgomery County, where I am, and Delaware County, where you are. But at the end of the day, it's our states in the United States which administer our elections. Some rules may differ. So some states might have same-day registration. Some states might have universal vote by mail. Neither of those are true for Pennsylvania, but one day maybe we will have them. So each state has their own election code. In Pennsylvania, we'll be talking a little bit more about our election code. So the states administer our elections.
That's great to know. But I know there are also some things that happen at other levels besides Pennsylvania. Just what happens there?
Well, what happens in Pennsylvania, or who has control over other elections?
Yeah, just, help me out.
So essentially the president does not have power over our elections, as I mentioned before, though, look, he is the leader of our country. So what he says and does has value, it has influence. So people listen to what he says. So it's important to separate fact from fiction. And a good example of that is vote by mail. So the president himself has made some untrue statements that vote by mail is corrupt, but he himself, so it's important to know about his actions, he himself voted by mail in this primary. He's now a resident of the state of Florida. So irrespective of position, I think we know what's true about people in power. And that's true, again, irrespective of party, that they like to retain power and control. So that's true from federal to state level to local level.
I think in most institutions we've all worked in, those people in power like to retain that power.
Yes. In the league, we struggle and we take that on, whether it's gerrymandering or here having a conversation to debunk some voting myths.
Well, are there any other people who have say in this election besides, we said the president really can't do much about it. Well, and it's mostly in the hands of the state.
Right. The states administer elections, but we know we have federal offices. So Congress does have power as well. Congress doesn't administer or regulate elections, but under the elections clause. And so I don't want to go too far into the weeds or too far into the law. But under the elections clause, Congress does have the right to alter and amend those regulations. So an example is maybe the Voting Rights Act or the Help America Vote Act, but Congress itself is not regulating elections. So that's why we see that there are different election codes and different administrations around elections, depending on the state that you live in. So different requirements, whether that's voter ID or if there is a voter ID, or the different gerrymandering, the redistricting laws. Those differ because of the state regulations, but Congress does have that power over federal elections, which may come into play. As far as somebody said to me, does Congress have the right to change the date of the election? They could potentially do that, but I don't think they would because, again, they've given that power over to the states to regulate and administer elections. But I'd say the key power that we've noticed that Congress does have post-corona, I'll just point this out, is funding. Funding is so critical to make sure that we can have a safe and secure election when it comes both the primary and because we haven't had a primary in Pennsylvania yet, but the general election come November.
Well, I know they also helped us do things in Delaware County, like even get those new voting machines. Some of that money does trickle down to the local level.
Yes, so there was a federal act. I mean, it wasn't that much money. We had hoped it would be more toward Pennsylvania, but we also had state funding toward those voting machines with some of the new voting reforms that happened that we've discussed previously, like vote by mail, which we'll be discussing in a minute.
Well, I know you've talked about, the president really doesn't have much power, but the Congress has some power. But there are still a lot of myths and realities here. What about things like voter ID? You said that was handled by the state, but some people says people still have to have a voter ID in Pennsylvania. What is the rule with voter ID? I know that's something that's near and dear to those people who would like to suppress people's votes.
Well, I think the first myth is debunking that everybody has an ID. So, I hear this all the time. Some, even my own brother said to me, well, like everybody has a license. Like, what's the big deal? They should always have to show it because everybody has an ID. Well, not everybody has an ID. Not everybody drives. I lived in New York City for a long time. I did not drive. So if I hadn't already had a driver's license, I may not have applied one. Maybe I would have a government ID or maybe no ID. And some people don't even have a birth certificate. So I think that's the first thing to consider, that many people do not have these IDs that the governments, and that's, again, now we know the states administer elections. So there's very restrictive voter ID laws. That's really having a certain ID when you go to register to vote. And unfortunately, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was gutted, which really opened the floodgates for very restrictive voter ID laws. But good news in Pennsylvania, and thanks to the League, which was my button for the League fell off. Just leave that off for now, but here it is. The voter ID law, it was a challenge to our state voter ID restrictive law, which really proportionately, it affects elder seniors, it affects students, it affects minorities. So we want to make sure that every person can engage in the political process. So that challenge in 2012 was successful. So here in Pennsylvania, you only need an ID as a first-time voter, or you're new to Pennsylvania, again, like a first-time voter. And so it's really important to know that that differs from state to state. Places like Texas has a very restrictive voter ID law. And so there's legal challenges going on state by state to take those on.
So one myth is you don't need a photo ID to go and vote at the polling place. And I think if you go to the votespa.com website, they give you a lot of alternatives. So you have to have some kind of identification. but it need not be the driver's license or a PennDOT
Yeah,
ID.
it could be a gas bill, a utility bill. It could be something to verify who you are because you've already registered to vote and said, this is who I am. And let's be frank, we have so many voter suppression efforts. People are not going in to pretend to be somebody else. I mean, some people just can't even vote at all because of restrictive voter suppression laws. So we know that I think the Brennan Center for Justice has looked at this, that nearly 11% of the population in not Pennsylvania, in the United States is restricted from voting and otherwise would have been eligible because of these voter ID laws. So that's what we should be focusing on, and not this negative fear mongering that somebody's trying to be me to go vote. I mean, what we really should be focused on is fighting these voter suppression efforts.
Everyone should have a voice in who runs our country and who runs our little
Yeah.
state and local opportunities right here. So let's get everybody out there to
Yeah,
vote.
and this shows you this is another reason to be aware of down ballot races, because the states, they have a lot of control over, they do have control over administration and regulation of our elections.
Well, I know the other thing everybody seems to be worried about is going to the polling places and getting sick. I think we've seen some things on the news in other states. And we will probably have a lot of problems in Pennsylvania, at least in where I live anyway, about getting poll workers. I know many of those who work at our polling place are my age or older, and we're kind of vulnerable. So the National League is trying to get everyone to vote by mail. And I think most league people are encouraging people to do the same. So why don't we just mandate that everybody vote by mail? Is that possible, Jamie?
Well, here in Pennsylvania, state by state, it can be regulated to have universal vote by mail. Other states do it, including GOP-led states like the state of Washington. And I say that because, unfortunately, this has become a partisan power play. There's already a lawsuit here in Pennsylvania trying to expand upon what we do now have, which seems revolutionary but has been around a long time. But for Pennsylvanians, it is revolutionary that we have vote by mail, and that's no excuse absentee. So meaning anybody and everybody can go onto votespa.com or get a paper printout application from their county board of elections. And we do know that the postage will be covered. I think Delaware County just announced it today, Delco, Monco, Philadelphia. So it's really important that people know that this is an option. But that partisan power play shows you again. I use Wisconsin as an example. You have a GOP-led legislature, like here in Pennsylvania, but a Democratic governor. And the governor did try to postpone by declaration, emergency declaration, the actual primary election. And it went to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court is GOP biased and GOP led, not biased, is led. And they shot down the declaration as this power struggle between partisanship and instead not really thinking about elections and accessibility and the health and welfare of the citizens. And so that was a power play. Here, we're lucky in Pennsylvania, June 2nd. A new date for our election. Other things like consolidating polling places was all part of legislation done by our legislature and signed into law by our governor. So right now we're not seeing that, but it could be a case. There was a bill proposed by a few legislators here in Pennsylvania, but it did not come to fruition. So some people still like to go to the polls. And we want to make sure if it's safe and accessible, which we do have new restrictions around the safety, the cleaning of the machines, and so forth for poll workers, to make sure that people can vote in person, as some people just cannot vote by mail. So you want to make sure that that's an option.
Well, the other thing I hear a lot about is people say, well, if people vote by mail, it's fraud. That to the best of my knowledge, there's been very little fraud ever been documented. And we're encouraging to vote by mail, but now the president says that that's going to be corrupt. Is that real?
No, that's the short answer is no. It's, these false claims of fraud are really dangerous to a healthy democracy. And This is not new. What we're hearing now, I just think unfortunately we're more aware of it because of all these briefings the president's doing, and we have a president who is very engaged with social media. And so this kind of voter fraud myth is just that it is a myth, and it's probably the biggest, or as the president says, bigly myth that we're going to discuss today is this so-called voter fraud. It's very rare. I think, as I mentioned, people are not impersonating other people. It is just like it's like non-existent. And in the cases where it's maybe an instance that it appears to be voter fraud, it's usually a clerical or administrative, some kind of issue in the administration of elections, and not particularly voter fraud. So we should be talking about voter suppression efforts like voter ID law, restricted voter ID laws, or purging the voter rolls. These are real instances of voter suppression and not particularly voter fraud. And vote by mail, while it's new to us again in Pennsylvania, we are learning what other states did or what other countries have done, where this is an opt-out system instead of an opt-in. Unfortunately, we still have an opt-in system here in Pennsylvania, but there's a ballot tracking a link now that you can actually track your ballot after you apply, which is great through, again, voter services on the PA Gov website. So there are ways, and I know that there's more funding going to the counties to make sure that they can really count all of these ballots that come in and be prepared for that, because this is really unprecedented. But I hope it gets people to realize that this is another option to make voting easy and accessible.
Well, I know we even got postcards from the state saying that,
Mhm.
the date was changed and there was some information about, again, votespa.com. So hopefully people will go there not only to get their mail in ballot, but to track it so they know what's happening. And they can even vote a little early too, can't they? They don't have to wait until June 2nd.
Right. So if they get their ballot, they're voting that way. The new voting reforms in Pennsylvania did give people the option to vote in person, both apply for their mail in ballot and vote in person at their county election offices. Right now, with Corona, I wouldn't emphasize that because that's not an option right now, but maybe toward June 2nd, we don't know. Maybe there will be ballot boxes. I know that a federal, so we talked about the difference in funding and powers around elections. There is a federal bill to give funding for ballot drop-off boxes, which other states have used very successfully, securing them. So it's not like somebody's breaking in. I
No
mean,
fraud.
these things are just made up. That is frankly all I can tell you. And the president himself, he voted by mail. I think I told you that. So I think at the end of the day, people need to know it is an option and it's done successfully in other states. And it shouldn't be something that people fear is going to be hijacked. I mean, you can't hack a piece of paper, okay? That's what we worry about. I'm not going to go into it, but voter security around machines. I can't hack a piece of paper. So you want people to vote by mail. You want people to vote on a paper ballot.
And then they can always count it. They can audit and
Yes.
count.
Yes, that's why we have a voter verified paper trail now, to make sure that we can audit and check our elections.
Well, I just wanted to ask you, now we've talked a lot about vote by mail. What about the post office? It seems like every day I read the paper and it says the post office is in trouble. What would happen if something went kafooey and the post office wasn't operating at the time we're supposed to be sending in mail-in ballots?
For lack of better words, it would be catastrophic for the post office to go bankrupt. And unfortunately, I think this is another partisan play grab and something we should be aware of. I mean, it's not just about elections and vote by mail. It's about the functioning of our economy or the health and welfare of citizens. Maybe like my dad, he gets his medication by mail, or small businesses. How would our country run without the post office? Or not even if it was closed down or going bankrupt, but this push for 4 times the fees. That really would be catastrophic. But with regards to vote by mail, I don't want people to panic. That's why counties like Montgomery County, where I live, or Delaware County, where you are, Roberta, and other states, some states oversee the entire state for administration of elections, are paying for postage for their ballots. And the post office themselves, the spokesperson for the post office has said, we will still deliver this ballot without postage. So it's really important people know that this should not hold them back, but they should be calling their congressperson and saying, you need to fund the post office, not just for vote by mail reasons, but really to keep our economy going and the connections that we have with people, because it really would be catastrophic.
Well, I'm really glad you straightened that out, Jamie, because I know a lot of people don't have a stamp around the house. People just don't do that anymore. So that you don't need 50 cents. You don't need to go to the post office or the grocery store and buy a stamp. You can actually just, if all else fails, just put that ballot in the mail and it will be delivered to the County Board of Elections. Copy
Right.
to the U.S. Post Office.
Yeah. I mean, I do want to go back to one thing we didn't really get to emphasize, and I think that this has come up. Doesn't matter what cable news station you watch. I mean, I don't watch any TV news. Maybe it's generational, but I go online. But I've seen this in different publications or through different social media channels that, this delay of the presidential election, is that possible? And it's, again, a fear mongering tactic. People are concerned. We have seen throughout not just the United States, but across the world, this push for authoritarian governments. And so here we are lucky. We have a US Constitution that clearly states the president and vice president have a term of 4 years. We have an electoral college, which I will not go into all of that. But it sets, it is very clear that Congress is to have these electoral votes from the different states by the end of December, and a newly elected president must take office, a president and vice president, by that 3rd January. So that would be January 20th, 2021. So very important to know this. And this may be something where Congress does step in and make sure this happens. Now, somebody else said to me, well, what if there isn't a vice president and a president? We have very clear in the Constitution as well a succession plan, and that would be the Speaker of the House. But again, we're not going there because we do have a system in place. We have states that regulate and administer our elections. We do not live in this kind of demagogue, kind of authoritarian government. And so I want people to know 20th Amendment of the Constitution clearly states that we should have a newly elected, new seated president and vice president by 2021.
So we have the federal Constitution guaranteeing that we will have a new or reelected president come January. And we also have protections in our state constitution about our elections. And we also have county boards of election that help regulate what's happening in Delaware County and Montgomery County and in Chester County.
Yes.
And those local county boards of elections have some power.
Yes, certainly they do. I mean, they're going to be consolidating polling locations. They're setting whether postage will be paid for the absentee ballots. They're picking voting machines. All 67 counties have new voting machines. They're hiring poll workers. So there's a lot of power around that. And that's why it's also important to know who you're voting for, because in most of the counties, other than Philadelphia County in Pennsylvania, those are appointed individuals to a board of elections. Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, this is something the league doesn't necessarily agree with. They are elected officials in Philadelphia, elected officials running elections. But that is something, a fight or a discussion for another day. But again, another reason down ballot races have such significance. But we're really lucky here in Pennsylvania. We have a very broad, very liberal constitution, which has helped us both fight redistricting battles here in Pennsylvania, to fight against voter ID, and also clearly states that is up to us, the people, to alter and reform our government.
Well, we're very lucky, as you've said, Jamie. But I want to ask you, if you had a magic wand, because you've looked at elections all over the country, how would you change elections for the better?
Oh goodness, I think about this stuff all the time. I guess that's my thing, elections. But I would definitely automatically I would enact if I could wave a magic wand, I would enact a federal constitutional right to vote. I would also put in automatic voter registration. So automatically people would be registered to vote, and I would have same day registration, making it very easy. If you're not automatically registered, you could just go in the same day you vote and register to vote, making it very easy. And of course, I would couple that with campaign finance and a gift ban. But hey, you asked me if I had a magic wand, what I would do, because our elections, it's fundamental to a democracy to have accessible, fair, and secure elections, which is what we fight for through the
Okay.
League of Women Voters.
Well, Jamie, as always, it's most helpful to have you here with us today. It's always informative to know what's really happening and to debunk a lot of those myths that we've been hearing all around. So, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Radnor Township, I want to thank Main MLTV, Mainline Network, for being our videographers and for sponsoring this program for us today so that everyone can find out more about the myths revolved around voting. And I would also like to thank our audience for tuning in, and hopefully they can help share with their neighbors what really is happening with the voting process in Pennsylvania with the primary election on June 2nd. Hopefully, we'll come back between now and November to share some of the things that will happen in the general election that they might need to know about. And we want to remind all of our viewers again to go to votespa.com, get that mail-in ballot, get it ready to go, and we want you to tell all your friends to do the same. So on behalf of the League of Women Voters, thank you again. We hope to see you again soon at the polling place or at the mailbox, hopefully.